Our unit on trade would not be complete without some study of the Silk Road network of trade that crossed Eurasia for centuries. In an upcoming unit, we'll be studying the age of exploration, and that's the story about how Europe, right, way over here in the corner, branched out by sea and reached out to the rest of the world, the Americas, Asia, Africa, all over the place. And for many people, that event sets into play a series of events that will lead to what we call as modern. Um, but what I want to emphasize here with our study of the Silk Road is that the arrival of Europeans by sea in the 16th century did not transform the rest of Eurasia's trading economy. Instead, the Europeans off in the corner here were kind of latecomers. They're the farthest edge of this huge network of trade stretching across the Eurasian landmass. A global economy, in the sense of what we think of as the world at the time, the global economy already existed by the time Europeans showed up. They did not really transform anything. Um, so I want to just show, well, let's back up for a second. Just look at this map, right? It's amazing. You notice some of the names of places. Maybe you've never heard of many of these places, but really, like, we tend to think, I don't know what you think of the center of world power is now in the world, but for centuries, the center of world power was here, in Central Asia, which is not today a leading force in global geopolitics, but for many, many years it was. Um, who controlled this network of trade? There are really three key players that form the nucleus of this trade system. Over here, you have Muslim kingdoms, and there are a series of Muslim kingdoms, and they would change, as you know, the caliphates would change, and they're made up of many different people. You have Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula, you have Persians from what is now Iran, you have Egyptians. So you have a lot of different groups there, but they are united by their faith, right? So you have this Muslim world stretching here on the through the middle and off to the western side of the Silk Road exchange. The mother lode, right, where everyone was trying to get to, the richest and most advanced node of this network is over here in China. And then another group that always gets left out, and I really hate this, I want to give them a little bit of attention in a world history course, are the people who live in something called the steppes, which run across this northern part of the Eurasian landmass. And those people are nomads, so they were not settled. They moved constantly with their animals, and they get left out of world history because they moved all the time and they didn't leave behind a lot of written records. But I do want to give them their due. These people dominated. Whenever they wanted to, they could easily dominate these sedentary, these sitting civilizations down to the bottom here, right? And they were a major threat really until the proliferation of gunpowder in the 16th century. Everyone down here had to pay attention to what was going on up here. Because these are some powerful warriors, first of all. And I'm sure you've probably heard of some of these very famous warriors of the steppes. The three most famous are Temujin. In the West, he was known as Genghis Khan. Just means universal ruler of the Mongols. In the middle here, much earlier, and really the downfall of Rome was caused by Attila the Hun. And his name is translated in the West as Scourge of God. And then much later, even after Genghis Khan, another great destroyer from the steppes named Tamerlane. His title literally means the Prince of Destruction. These were not disorganized people. These were not stupid people in any way. They had confederations, they had political organization, and they were led by great leaders like this who could mobilize huge numbers of people to conquer whole civilizations. Just a couple of slides to show you what the steppes look like today. There are still people who live on the steppes today. They still live in mobile homes, right? Like they're called yurts, these tents that could be picked up and moved, and they are horse people. This is what this is what gave them their power, their control of animals that people in sedentary civilizations did not have. That they're the first people to learn how to tame and ride horses, and that gave them a lot of mobility and speed. But most of all, it was their weapons. They invented something called the composite bow, which historians will say that it had a firepower that was not exceeded until the invention of handheld firearms. So for many centuries, this was the world's deadliest weapon. It's called composite because it has various parts that are glued together. But with a composite bow and on horseback, when you could have both hands free because of the invention of the stirrup, a hugely underappreciated weapon in itself, right? When you have a stirrup, you don't have to hold on to the reins. Both hands are free. You can ride horseback and shoot. You can, invade really quickly, cause deadly destruction, and then turn around and retreat before your opponent even knows what's happened, right? So the speed that they could move and the kinds of weapons that they could employ made them just hugely formidable. So, like I said, they were a part of this Silk Road trade network up here to the north. And they were in on all the action as well. This is just a series of photos from the New York Times of some of the territories covered by the Silk Road. It's just stunning to look at in photographs. One thing I want to emphasize is that it's called the Silk Road, but it's really not one road or one pathway. It's a series of roads or pathways, and they're not roads in the sense that we might think of. Like it's not paved. They're not, lanes. Instead, it's just ways that people would move over the historical centuries to get from place A to place B. The name Silk Road itself comes from a German explorer. It was a term coined in the 19th century. And we really know a lot about it because of this British explorer named R.L. Stein, who he's like the Indiana Jones of archaeology, who basically traversed the whole entire Silk Road and found all kinds of documents in so many different languages that you can see there, manuscripts that helped us understand what was really happening on the Silk Road. So the starting point for trade in the Silk Road would have been over here in China. And it really began in like the 1st or 2nd century BC under Han China, which you see here sketched out on the map. The Han Chinese emperor sent out an explorer named Zhang Qian in the 1st century, and he's the first person to bring back kind of a reliable account of what could be seen beyond the borders of China. He went into Central Asia. He was like kidnapped twice, held hostage for like 10 years. I think he married a woman from the steppes. But anyway, a great explorer, would be a great research topic. In China, there are monuments to him everywhere. He's a hero, right? Because he's the first to bring back information that China could use in reaching out beyond its own borders. The main product that was sold throughout the Silk Road, or the moved along the Silk Road for trade purposes, was silk. And the production of silk, which is called sericulture, it was invented in China, but it became a state secret, right? That Chinese emperors guarded. How do you actually make silk? Most people could never imagine, like, how do you make silk? It comes from worms. Anyway, so how that is done, that was a Chinese guarded secret. And so they kept it under wraps so no one would know, and that kept the price of silk really high. It was a huge demand all the way from Han China on the one side to the Roman Empire on the other side. Han emperors made sure that the Great Wall extended out here for protection. And they would start sending out garrisons to guard the pathway through from Han China over here towards Central Asia. This is called the Gansu Corridor. Oh, well, first of all, let me show you the Jade Gate. This is where the Chinese set up this is kind of the edge of China, right? And they set up this thing called the Jade Gate to guard. So you can see like the remains of a castle there. I don't know what this is, another castle. from the Jade Gate. And then also this Gansu Corridor. It's also called the Hexi Corridor. And it's basically just a valley that runs, let me see if I can get the map here, a valley that runs through here where on the one side you have this Tibetan plateau and on the other side you have the Gobi Desert. So you have, okay, here's China over here and you have this narrow corridor to get out through these two big geographic barriers or obstacles. And so China was really guarded from the rest of Eurasia for, much of its very early ancient history, and it's only the discovery of this corridor here that lets China reach out. So the first place that you would encounter when you came through this Gansu corridor is a place called Dunwang. Here's a place I've been wanting to go. I would love to go here. Here's what it looks like today. Even today, it's like a frontier merchant town. But during the Han Dynasty, this was the westernmost garrison town in China. And it's a lush and important oasis in what you can see is otherwise a very hostile desert-looking environment. And you can get water here and food and accommodation if you're a merchant or a soldier. And throughout the Silk Road's era, this dune-fringed city of Dunwang was the only access east and west for traders and pilgrims and soldiers, etc. It's also the site of these great caves just outside the city, where inside the caves you'll find all this Buddhist art. It's like striking evidence of the role that religion played along the Silk Road, that it served not only to transport goods, but also religious ideas and intellectual ideas. Buddhism spread, Islam spread, Christianity spread, all of these religions spread through the Silk Road. These caves here contain some of the greatest religious art in galleries around the world. Thousands of Buddhist and Taoist wall paintings. So after you left Dunwang over here, you had a choice. You could take one of two alternative routes, one to the north and one to the south, and they're both going around this very formidable Taklamakan Desert. Here you can see what the Taklamakan Desert looks like. You could not go into the interior of this desert. Even today, you have to have lots of planning, the proper equipment and supplies. So it was a huge geographic barrier between east and west, but traders did have a way around the barrier following these ancient paths to the north and to the south. Here again is a look at the Taklamakan Desert. It has a variety of local names. It's hard to pin down what the origins of these names, what Taklamakan really means. Some people say it comes from a Uyghur word for the land of irrevocable death, like there's any other kind of death. Like some people think it means leave alone or abandoned, or some say it comes from Turkish, which can be translated to be the land or the place of ruins. Or if you go in, you will never come out. So these definitions just give you a sense of the dangerous nature of this desert, and how it's the Earth's 17th largest desert. To the north and south of the Taklamakan Desert, you have these snow-covered mountain ranges. You have the mighty Kunlun Massif to the south, and you have the Pamirs up here to the west, and the Tian Shan, which translated in Chinese means heavenly mountains, to the north. So you have some huge barriers, but these melting snows from these mountains helped water these different oasis towns on the fringes of the desert. So these oasis towns would provide resources and accommodation for people in Silk Road caravans, and that's what made the route possible. So after you take either the northern or the southern route from the Taklamakan Desert, 1,300 miles after Dunwang, you would reach the town called Kashgar. So this is like the distance from LA to Seattle, right? You would finally, after traipsing through all these oasis towns, reach Kashgar on the other side. And at this point, Chinese traders would turn back, right? Their outward journey is done. They'd hand over the goods to some middlemen, people like Kushans or Sagdians or Indians, who for a fee would move these Chinese exports even further westward toward their ultimate destination. And at the same time, the Chinese merchants would pick up stuff from the West or Central Asia and start taking those back towards Chang'an. Here's Kashgar today. I just think it's so interesting to see what these towns still exist. not in their former glory. So what is it that the Chinese were trying to get from Central Asia? First and foremost, it was horses. And there's an area, so here's Kashgar right here. There's an area near Kashgar called Fergana. And Fergana, it's in a valley, and it's famous for its horses. There were these horses, legendary horses there, that the Chinese called the Han Shui Ma. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm sure, but it transliterates as sweats blood. It was these horses that were so big and strong, and they I don't know, something about their skin, their blood vessels were very near their skin, so it looked like they were sweating blood from these glands around their shoulders and their neck. And the Chinese loved them, and they needed them to fight these steppe nomads up to the north who were constantly invading China. And the Chinese were desperate to get horses for themselves so that they could counter these invading steppe nomads to the north that are always a threat throughout Chinese history. That's why they built the Great Wall. They're trying to defend themselves against these steppe nomads to the north. Okay, so moving on, then from there, these middlemen had numbers of different routes they could take. They could continue over through Samarkand and Bactria to reach the Mediterranean Sea. They could head south through what is now Pakistan. And actually, this is the route of the world's highest highway called the Karakoram Highway. And then, oh, sorry, my GIF is not showing it here. Yeah, so this is the Karakoram Highway, the world's highest highway, which would give you access to the Arabian Sea. And from there, you could go all the way around to the Red Sea and to Egypt, so you could hit the sea routes by heading south here. Oh, let's see, I think I have a slide showing the sea routes here. Yeah, so once you reached here, which is Pakistan, then you could head south through the Red Sea and eventually hit Egypt, and then even crossing land, tap into the Mediterranean sea route as well. None of this would have been possible without a certain animal. Of course, I got to get the baby camel in there. That's just so cute. So there's an animal without which none of this would have happened, and that's the camel. You have two types of camels. You have the dromedary camel, that's the Arabian camel, which has one hump, and then you have the Bactrian camel, who comes from Central Asia and has two humps. Later on, Muslims from the 11th century would breed some kind of hybrid which only has one hump but has some of the advantages of the Bactrian camel. So what is so great about these camels? They go farther and longer than horses or mules or donkeys. They have a carrying capacity like 50% more than any other pack animal. They can carry up to 300 pounds. A mule can carry only 200 pounds. They don't need to have shoes. They don't need to be shod. That's because they have these kind of webbed. They have two toes, but there's a webbing between their toes that helps them. You can't have wheeled vehicles going across the Silk Road, right? There's too much opportunity for things to go wrong there. You'd have to deal with breakdowns all the time. You don't have to deal with that with a camel. They live longer than donkeys and mules, and most importantly, they conserve water and food in their systems naturally. So they're like the what do you call it? Like the electric vehicle of the ancient world. They can go and go and go and not need any kind of replenishment. And mostly caravans would move, like groups of people moving together across the Silk Road. And these caravans were like moving cities. You might have 600 to 1,000 camels, hundreds of merchants, nomads who would be hired as military protection, right? So here's where the steppe people come into play. You'd have entertainment. Plus, along the way, you would get joined by local people, local merchants who wanted to follow along with you along the same routes. A caravan could travel about 1,000 miles in 40 days at top speed, but it usually took them more like 6 months because there was a lot of stopping and resting along the way to their destination. What are some of the things that they're carrying here? Well, I mean, there's a huge risk involved in this journey, so you need to be carrying things that are valuable and worth the risk. So that means that you're often trading like high value prestige goods, high status goods, small, not too bulky, but very valuable. So from Rome, you would have like wine and spices, and glassware was a huge thing. Roman glassware. China, of course, you would have silks, but even the middlemen in the middle, like these people called the Sagdians, would have wine and carpets and linens. So really everyone, and then the nomads got into it too, right? So everyone is is involved here. In the middle, you would have, well, how did this actually work? What you would have is a family network. So you might have a family from Antioch who would send off, cousins and uncles and people to all these other different cities, so that these families would operate across regions, and they would all speak the same language. You could set out from the Mediterranean knowing that you could stop at any of these key cities where you had friends or kinsmen who would give you credit, for example, or give you guidance, or tell you what you need, or explain the local markets and tell you where to sell and how to buy. So these networks of people became really important. Also for the language. Aramaic was the language spoken across these eastern trade routes. It's also the language of Jesus. In the middle, you had these people called Sagdians who spoke an Iranian language, and they reached all the way to China. Their homeland was over here in a place called Sagdiana. These people are so interesting to me. I think they would be a great research topic, because they're uniquely placed here between these great empires, between the Muslim caliphates over here and then the Chinese empires over here. It's what is today Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. But this is this merchant society who made a great profit off the trade between China and other parts of Eurasia. They were mobile and multilingual, and highly skilled. I have a link here to this fascinating article about the Sagdians, which, again, if you chose them to be a topic, I think they'd be super interesting. The Sagdians, influencers on the Silk Road, major influence on world history. Anyway, it'd be a great topic. I'm just highly recommending it to someone who's interested in, like, the middlemen of history. You have also these letters that are found between Sagdians along the Silk Road that have been found and translated. Great primary sources, letters telling about the life. So one is actually, a few of them are from women, and one is by, I think it's this one, is a woman who was abandoned in Dunwang by her husband, and she's writing, I would rather be a dog or a pig's wife than yours, right? Really, like, reading her husband the riot act in these ancient Sagdian letters. So really, you have from 200 BCE and on, you have this remarkable time of prosperity and cultural exchange between these four great empires. You have the Han Dynasty over here, China. You have the Kushan Empire here in purple, and you have the Parthians, the Persians here in turquoise, and then the Romans over there in green. This was the beginning of the Silk Road age, this remarkable time, and everyone profited. Even beyond these settled people, again, the powerful nomad confederacies up to the north here were important and influential. They could trade horses and leather to these settled empires or participate as guides and defense. Everyone has an interest in keeping this thing going. One commodity that's often not appreciated that was traded along the Silk Road are people. What you have here is, it's like this ease of travel along the Silk Road made it possible for people who weren't even merchants to be part of the action, like travelers and craftspeople and entertainers. And then also listed in this people who were exchanged are people who did not go willingly. That is, slaves were also part of the exchange here. The most important slaves are people called Mamluks. These are like Turkish people. Turks were one of these nomad groups to the north here. Turks were often captured young men who they were captured by Muslims, by Islamic armies. Islamic armies would go and, well, you got to think about it. Like, when Islam spread, you'd have a small number of Muslims trying to rule over large numbers of people in these places that they would conquer. How do they do that? Well, they had this ingenious kind of system. They would go capture these Turkish boys between the ages of 13 and 16, like huge numbers of them. And they would convert them to Islam, and they would drill them to be the bodyguard elite forces of these Muslim rulers. So Muslims largely ruled through these Mamluk slaves, these converted former nomadic people who were loyal to them and them alone. They were cut off from their original homelands. They were at the mercy of these Muslim rulers. Anyway, they helped boost up the power of these Islamic caliphates and Islamic societies. These Mamluks who were traded here. And then above all, you would have missionaries and religious converts who would move back and forth along the Silk Road, who would have a profound effect on everyone, both urban and the people from the steppes. This is a fascinating fresco or painting from some caves in Western China from the 9th century, where you have a blue-eyed Central Asian monk teaching an East Asian monk on the side over here. This Silk Road thing is being resurrected today. It's often called the new Silk Roads. China is assembling a whole system of trade routes, binding other regions closer to it, as the map label here says, through pipelines and roads and port cities that they're building. It's called China's Belt and Road Initiative. And it's become kind of a controversial thing. Let me just play a few minutes of this here.
Called 一带一路 in Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative was first announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping in 2013. It's a globe-spanning plan with the purpose of strengthening trade, infrastructure, and investment links between China and an estimated 65 other countries. Together, potentially participating countries account for more than 30% of global GDP, 62% of the world's population, and 75% of known energy reserves. Despite what the name may imply, the road actually refers to a maritime network of shipping lanes running from China through Southeast Asia, Africa, and all the way to Europe. The belt, on the other hand, refers to the overland routes, stretching from Central Asia to Europe. The most visible part of the Belt and Road so far has been infrastructure. In Kenya, for example, China built a $3.2 billion railway connecting the port city of Mombasa to the country's capital, Nairobi. It now takes just 4.5 hours to get between the two cities, about a third of the time it used to take on the old rail system. But it's not just Kenya. Across the world, the Belt and Road has meant billions of dollars in investment from the Chinese.
Okay, I'll stop there. But that's partly what makes it so controversial. That some people are saying this is just China's way of making other countries indebted to China so that they can pull these people into their own orbit, right? So that all of these places can become dependent on China. So China's sort of trying to project some kind of soft power out in the world to build its own superpower status. There's probably something true to that, but they're building some huge things all over Eurasia and even into Africa to connect these places, just like they were connected 1,000 years ago under the Silk Road.